What terrifying confession has someone told you while intoxicated? Story 1. During my first year of college, among all the new friends I made that year, there was one guy who was always a goofball, very laid back, casual, and down for whatever. The biggest red flag we got from him was that whenever people were drinking and hanging out, he would always completely black out. He drank way too much and would kind of stumble around the party. While also intoxicated after the party had wound down one night, a few people and I asked him why he always went so hard. While drooping his head, sloshing around, and slurring everything, he told us that a few months earlier, the summer before college started, his best friend had called him. They lived in a small town by the beach, and his friend had asked him to come meet him to watch the sunset by the water. He biked over there, sat down, and they talked for a while. Everything seemed fine. Then his friend pulled out a pistol and ended his own life instantly. Apparently, my friend had to call the police while covered in blood, completely in shock. A few weeks later, he went off to college a few states away, still traumatized and unable to sleep or focus on anything. He did not remember telling us that story, and I do not think any of us wanted to bring it up. His drinking habits did not change until he was about to graduate, by which point he started going to therapy, got a job right after graduation, and seems to be doing better in the years since, thank goodness. Story 2. This happened about 6 months ago. My brother and I were drinking one night because it was the weekend, and we just wanted to get drunk and play video games. We had done plenty of shots and plenty of drinks, and we were absolutely wasted. We were having fun playing some old zombie games for nostalgia, and we paused it to grab some chips. As I was grabbing the salsa, he told me that he had tried to end his life about a month earlier. He had taken some pills and the doctors had to pump his stomach. He told me the whole time he had been thinking of me and how terrible and depressed I would be if he had died, and that he would never want to lose me. I told him I had also tried the same thing a while ago and thought exactly the same about him. We continued playing while talking about everything under the moon, and we have been talking every day since. We have never missed a day and never will. We are both doing a lot better now and are both in therapy. It is nice having someone to talk to and trust about these things. Story 3. My ex-boyfriend in college once told me, when he was blackout drunk, that a few years earlier, he and a bunch of other kids had broken into a house to have a party. The family that lived there was on vacation and the house was empty. They all got drunk and someone decided it would be fun to break a picture on the wall. Then someone else did too. Eventually, it devolved into them all destroying the house, absolutely everything they could. All the windows were broken. They broke the legs off all the chairs and used them to beat holes into the walls. They ripped and stole clothing, tore or burned all the family photos on the walls, and damaged everything in sight. I do not remember all the things he said they broke, but I remember him crying and saying that they had ruined those people's lives and that there was no way to make it right. I honestly think he was so drunk that he did not remember telling me because we never mentioned it again. About 2 years later, he punched me in the face for asking for a ride to work one too many times. So I guess he was a terrible person regardless of his situation or alcohol intake. Story 4. My great-grandfather served in World War II. He never spoke of it. If anyone asked, he would politely get up, grab his drink, and go somewhere else. After my first deployment to Afghanistan, he called me and said, I can finally talk to someone. I started spending a lot of time with him. I would tell him my stories, and he would share his. When I went on leave, we had a night where he and I were drinking together. After a while, he told me about a time when he and his unit found a small concentration camp. He said not all of them were like the large ones we read about. The first thing he remembered was the smell. It was so bad he almost threw up several times. The camp did not have ovens or gas chambers. When they went through the north side of the camp, they found a pit that had been dug out. Inside the pit were what must have been thousands of decaying bodies. He said the ones on the bottom were probably just skeletons by then. When they spoke to the survivors, they said the soldiers there would line people up randomly and shoot them, letting their bodies fall into the pit. Some who were starving would throw themselves in, hoping to break their necks and end their suffering quickly. The guards knew the Allied forces were getting close, so they locked the gates, took the food, poisoned what was left, and put corpses in the place where water had been stored. The diseases and infections were so bad that many soldiers in his unit were scared to help the survivors. He told me that out of everything he had gone through, that was the worst. It tore him apart. He said those poor people haunted his dreams. He felt like he did not do enough, that every time they could not push the line forward, it meant another day or week of torture for those people. My great-grandfather was proud of his service in World War II and lived a good life. He passed away in 2011, at home in his bed, watching his favorite show. Story 5. On my birthday, I got very drunk drinking at home with friends and let slip my most devastating memory from my time in the military, which is truly the source of my post-traumatic stress disorder. While in Afghanistan, my unit stumbled upon a stray herd of goats in an area where we regularly met with an informant we knew to be a shepherd. We found a mass of 17 decaying bodies that were the entirety of the man's nomadic clan. It was presumed that the informant had been discovered by the Taliban, and they put the entire group to death and left them there. I spent almost a week burying the bodies. Some were decapitated, including one child. I think my friends were arguing about the situation in Ukraine, and I was just so drunkenly frustrated. None of them had ever seen the terrifying reality of what happens in war. Such things are just headlines to so many. I was 19 when this happened, and it became the focal point that changed a lot of my worldviews. I decided not to renew my enlistment for this reason. I understand the conflict in Ukraine is different from the war in Afghanistan, but I was very drunk and have always resented how a large portion of Americans have this detached approach to promoting violence around the globe because they have never witnessed it firsthand. I found out later, after the deployment when I was back in Germany, that the way we buried those people was completely inconsistent with Islamic and Pashtun burial traditions. I could not have known that at the time, but I have always suspected that this event was never made known to the Afghan people to cover up United States involvement and questions about the informant network, especially now that the Taliban are in control. I have always had deeply personal regrets about the events that led up to this. Part of my job was to coordinate information requests for operational intelligence, and these requests occasionally required the help of an informant, although how we got the information was not considered something I needed to know. I live with the very real possibility that while I was sitting at a desk trying to get useful details for a presentation, I initiated a chain of events that contributed to the horrific deaths of innocent people. Story 6. They did not tell me this while they were drunk, but I think it fits here. I am a volunteer at a nursing home. When one of the female residents was close to death, she confided in me. One time her husband had cheated on her with the neighbor's wife. When the neighbor's husband found out, he was furious and intended to physically harm her husband. They worked out a deal where the neighbor's husband would not hurt him if he could return the favor. In essence, her husband agreed to let the neighbor be with her in order to save himself from a severe beating. It got worse. She later became pregnant and told her husband for the rest of his life that the child was his, but she honestly believed it was the neighbor's. Her whole life, she carried this burden about her son and what her husband had done to her, both the infidelity and the way he treated her as if she were nothing. It was truly a heartbreaking conversation. Story 7. My best friend told me she loved me and wanted me to leave my wife last night. I have known her since we were in grade school and I feel sick. I do not even know if she remembers, because this morning she texted me about a new manga release that I should buy for my wife. I talked to my wife about it when she got home a few hours ago. She had actually gone to my friend's house to pick up my guitar and my gaming console that I had left there. My friend was mostly quiet and seemed like she had just woken up, so I wonder if she is worried about how to handle it. I told my wife everything that happened, and she did cry a little about her relationship with our friend, but she mostly seemed worried about how I was handling it. She told me to wait before deciding whether to cut the friend out, so I can think about it and have time to talk to her first. We both read many of the comments people left online, and it sparked a lot of good conversations. There were some more explicit things my friend said that I did not post because it was a bit embarrassing. My wife wants to talk to her about that, but she is letting me have whatever conversation I need first. I saw a few people worried I might leave my wife, and I just want to say it is absolutely laughable that I ever would. My wife has no competition, no matter who it is. There is absolutely 100% nobody as amazing or as cute as my wonderful wife. I am never going to forget that. Story 8. My parents finally admitted that they had another child who died before my twin sister and I were born. This in itself was not exactly terrifying, because unfortunately that does happen sometimes. What made it so terrifying was the fact that my sister and I somehow knew. Yet for our whole lives, our parents convinced us we were misremembering. I am not sure how we knew. Our brother died a year before we were born, and we never met him. There are no pictures of him, and he was never mentioned. Our parents and the rest of the family collectively forgot about him, which is completely in line with how our family behaves. They will just ignore everything they do not want to acknowledge. Yet somehow, from a very early age, my sister and I told everyone we had a brother. Many of our school friends knew about him. When it was finally revealed that it was just the two of us, our friends accused us of lying, but we were genuinely confused because we knew it was true. Many times over the years, we confronted our parents about it. Every single time they lied to us. They promised we never had any other siblings and swore we were just confused. Then one day, when they were both drunk, we overheard them talking about him and ran to confront them. They finally confessed. This still does not explain how we knew. I can only imagine we must have seen or heard something when we were very young and do not consciously remember, but it is deeply disturbing that the entire family lied to us for 16 years. We even remembered his name. The most unsettling thing of all is that my sister and I still think they are lying. Both of us have a distinct memory of playing with a slightly older boy when we were very young, and both of us remember thinking of him as our older brother in that memory. Story 9. I was at a bar one night in an affluent town when an older man next to me started talking about his sailing days. He said he had a 60-foot sailboat and used to travel all over North and South America. His story was from the mid-1980s. One night, he was anchored near an island off the coast of Venezuela. He was with his girlfriend, and they had just fallen asleep when he heard a bump. At first, he barely noticed it, but decided to check it out. He left the sleeping berth, and like in most sailboats, there was a steep set of stairs leading from the cabin to the deck. He said he always kept a pistol holstered and hanging from the stair rail, and as an afterthought, he grabbed it while climbing up. When he reached the deck, he saw a man coming over the railing with what looked like an assault rifle. He said he fired 2 rounds into the man, who fell back over the railing. He ran over and saw the man had fallen into another boat where there was a second man, also armed. He shot him a couple of times as well, pulled up anchor, and got out of there fast. He said pirate activity was not uncommon in that area, and these men would board boats, tie up the people on board, steal everything, and then burn the boats with the victims still inside. The bump he had heard had been their boat coming alongside his. He said that was the last time he ever sailed to South America. Story 10. My first roommate in college got extremely drunk one night after his girlfriend broke up with him. I was putting him to bed when he told me he had assaulted her on his bed while she was unconscious from medication when she was sick. He also told me it happened while I was sleeping only a few feet away, and he described in detail what he had done. I felt horrible. A few weeks later, I found his ex on campus and talked to her about it. It was not easy. She reassured me that she did not hold me responsible for what he had done, but I offered to testify if she ever reported him. My roommate ended up leaving the university at the end of that semester. I told the school what he had confessed to me, but he claimed he had been drunk and that I had pressured him into talking about it. During the investigation and the time leading up to it, I switched roommates because of how passive-aggressive he became toward me. It was a terrible situation. I still feel a bit of guilt, wishing I had woken up that night. Years later, I was invited to her wedding, and we caught up. Her husband and I even became friends since we had a similar class schedule. Story 11. I am not sure if this is genuinely terrifying, but it deeply disturbed me when it happened. This was more than 6 years ago. I rented a house with 3 other guys I knew well enough to live with. We hosted parties often, and over time we all noticed some of our belongings going missing. None of us accused each other. We all assumed it was people who came to the parties. Years later, I was at a bar and ran into an old high school classmate. Our school was small, so we all knew each other. This guy, who was training to be a police officer, started joking about the terrible things he had done and how funny it was that he was going to be in law enforcement. He was drunk and went on to say that he and a friend used to go to house parties, And while one of them distracted everyone with card tricks, the other would go through the house stealing things. As he told the story, everything clicked. They had come to our parties often, and one of them always carried a backpack. It was kind of his trademark. I confronted him about it, and he awkwardly left. I never took it further, but I did tell my old housemates. For the record, he never became a cop. It was unsettling because it shattered the trust I had in people and taught me a harsh life lesson about how easily we can be deceived. Story 12. I knew a Vietnam veteran who went by the name Soldier. He struggled with addiction and lived on the streets, but he was kind and always helped out by taking out the trash for a few dollars. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. Even as a boy, he had struggled mentally and probably never should have been drafted, but he was sent to Vietnam anyway. One day, while we were hanging out, drinking, grilling, and playing games, he started sharing his story. He said he had operated a tank during the war, and one day a sniper shot the tracks, disabling it. As the crew evacuated, he was hit in the shoulder and head. When he woke up, he was in a Vietnamese village being cared for by locals. He said the villagers fed him and told him, "Go home, this is not your war." They nursed him back to health, but soon after the village was attacked by American soldiers. He said he tried to stop them but could not, and in desperation, he used a rocket launcher to destroy American helicopters to protect the villagers who had saved his life. He was later discharged. He could not read and lived off small government payments that were always pending review. I used to help him read his mail when I was a teenager. He had been waiting years for that money. I do not know if he ever received it. I still see his name in arrest records sometimes, but I have not seen him in person in a long time. Every time we drank together, he would get emotional, telling everyone how much he loved and appreciated them. He always told that same story, word for word, every single time. Story 13. I went to a Halloween party several years ago, and later in the night, a group of about 20 people had gathered outside around a fire pit. Everyone was standing around talking in smaller groups, as usually happens at parties. I walked inside for a bit and came back about 10 minutes later. When I returned, instead of hearing multiple conversations, everyone was silent while a very drunk guy told a story. I did not know him and later found out that aside from his girlfriend, no one else at the party knew him either. He was telling his story to about 20 complete strangers. The story was about how, during a family vacation to Europe, when he was a teenager, he was assaulted by a man. As the story went on, he became more emotional. When it became clear where the story was heading, his girlfriend tried to stop him, saying things like, "Are you sure you want to tell this now? And why don't you tell me the rest when we get home?" None of it worked. He finished the story in vivid detail and then said something like, "I can't believe I actually said all that. I've never told anyone before." The whole situation was so uncomfortable and heartbreaking. I felt terrible for him and hated that he had gone through that. I hoped that getting it off his chest helped him somehow, but given how drunk he was and the fact that he had never told anyone before, I can only imagine how awful it must have been for him the next morning when he realized what he had shared with a group of strangers. Story 14. A friend called me one night asking if he could stay at my place. When he arrived, I found out he and his wife had been drinking with their neighbors. His wife had said she was going out to get cigarettes but took longer than expected and was not answering his calls. He drove to the shopping center where the gas station was and found her in a car with another man. He was devastated. The police showed up and ended up dropping him off at my house, which was a 20-minute drive away in another suburb. They had a young daughter at the time and later had a son. I thought he would divorce her, but they stayed together. He made me swear never to tell anyone, which I kept for 4 years. We have a big group of mutual friends, and I was not even his closest one. But this incident broke him. He started drinking too much and picking fights when drunk, even at a friend's wedding. Being the only one who knew the truth, I felt responsible for trying to help him keep it together. He told me the only reason he stayed with her was because of their kids. I had to tell everyone at the wedding that he was just drunk and upset about old issues with his wife. A few months ago, another friend told me he had found our friend drunk and unresponsive one night. His wife had called asking for help, and he told her to call an ambulance before going over. When our friend sobered up, he told him that his wife had cheated on him 3 times, not just once like I thought. One affair had even been with a friend of theirs while he was away starting a new job in Los Angeles. I did not know all the details, but when the other friend told me, He was shocked that I had never mentioned it to my wife. He said he had already told his own, so that night I finally told mine. We still see this couple regularly, and I do not think his wife knows that I know about her infidelity. The rest of our friends just think he drinks too much and acts foolish sometimes, but they have no idea why. I still have to bite my tongue and pretend I do not think she is a terrible person. Story 15. A close friend of a friend after a music festival was acting strange as we were coming down from taking MDMA. He had also been drinking heavily throughout the event. We were walking back to our rented place, hoping to find the rest of our group. He was a Korean guy, and when I first met him, it seemed almost humorous when he would rant about how much he disliked white women, calling them basic and fake. But over time, it stopped being funny and started becoming unsettling. Eventually, it got to the point where if someone had told me he had hurt a white woman, I would have believed it without hesitation. That night was particularly alarming. He was slurring and rambling, surrounded by crowds of young white people. A girl accidentally bumped into him. It was the aftermath of a festival. It happens. But he immediately turned and raised his fist to hit her. I grabbed his arm before he could throw the punch. He was furious and shouted that he would kill her, ranting that white girls thought they could do whatever they wanted. Then, without warning, he started talking about his insecurities, saying he hated himself for things out of his control and blamed his father for it. I tried to calm him down, telling him it was not that bad, that he was a good person and successful, even though deep down I never really liked him. Story 16. My paternal grandmother was not financially stable, but she was the most caring grandparent a child could ever hope for. My family was comfortably middle class when I was growing up, so I did not realize until later that she was constantly buying things she could not afford just to spoil her 5 grandchildren. Every month, she hosted a baby's day out sleepover at her small house, a tradition that lasted until we were old enough to drive. She would pull us out of school on our birthdays and take us home with new video games and mountains of sweets. Her Christmas gifts were always the best. At the same time, she cared for my adult aunt who had Down syndrome, even though both of them had serious health issues that should have required professional help. I mention all this to show how deeply her generosity shaped our childhood. She could be a hypochondriac and terrible with money, and she often guilted my father into keeping toxic family ties. But I adored her and saw her as a saint. When things became difficult in my family before I left for college, her calls were the ones I always answered. The gifts slowed after high school, but her love never did. After I graduated college, her health declined sharply. I took as many long weekends off work as possible to visit her, knowing time was short. On my second to last trip, she was clearly under the influence of prescribed narcotics, but I did not care. We sat together for hours just talking. When she grew quiet, I brought up childhood memories of sleepovers, and it made her smile. Half jokingly, I asked her why she had spoiled us so much. Her face went serious and she whispered, "Because my marriages cheated your father of a childhood." Then she told me everything. All 3 of her husbands, including my biological grandfather, had been abusive in different ways. I had uncovered bits of that over the years, but not the worst parts. The second husband, my aunt's father, had been the most violent. He was addicted to drugs and often came home enraged. My grandmother would send him away on fishing trips to protect the family. One night, he returned in a frenzy, screaming that he would kill everyone. He had a cleaver and a roll of cord. My grandmother and my uncle, who was only 12 at the time, shot him with a shotgun and a deer rifle before he reached the porch. The police came, removed the body, and that was it. I was speechless. Learning that the woman I saw as pure kindness had endured that much pain and had been forced into an act of violence for survival shook me deeply. I left soon after. Well, a few weeks later, I got the call emergency services had arrived just minutes before me. My aunt had found her collapsed in the living room, already gone. That was the last real conversation I ever had with her. Story 17. I knew something was wrong with my wife. So one day we took the kids to the park, and I suggested having a few drinks. She agreed, and at first it was fun, but as she loosened up, she began to tell me things I never wanted to hear. She admitted that she needed other men and said she was sorry. She told me we got married too young and that she felt the need to be with random people. I obviously did not agree, and that was when I found out she'd been unfaithful for months. She confessed to leaving work to meet someone else, even on days when our kids missed her terribly. She even described an incident when she had been with him and came home pretending everything was normal. I had unknowingly been close to discovering the truth that night, but only understood what had happened much later. Since that day, I have been struggling with deep depression. She completely shattered me and showed no remorse. She has no empathy and manipulates everything to her advantage. There is so much more that happened between us that it feels unbelievable, like something out of fiction. She is 100% heartless. Story 18. It was not confessed to me directly, but I once overheard my mother telling her friends that she wished she had never had me, that I had ruined her life. I was a good child, polite, quiet, and obedient, especially compared to my younger sister, who was constantly difficult but still adored by my parents. My sister struggled with anxiety and selective mutism when she was young, while I had untreated attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because my parents did not believe it existed. Anytime I acted out even slightly, I was punished immediately, so I learned to hide my symptoms from an early age. My sister, on the other hand, received expensive therapy, endless praise, and every opportunity she wanted. I was left to handle things on my own. She went to college for pastry arts and was constantly celebrated for being a perfect student, while I was criticized for struggling through 2 accounting degrees despite having an undiagnosed learning disability. My sister's teenage years were chaos, violent outbursts, tantrums, even physical attacks against me, but she was always excused, always forgiven. She once tried to grab the steering wheel while I was driving, nearly causing an accident, and my parents still blame me. Everyone who meets my family immediately notices how much my parents favor her. Today she is unemployed, living off their support, while I have worked hard to build a stable life, buy a car, buy a home, and maintain my marriage. My parents acknowledge that she can be cruel and that I am the kind one, yet somehow I am still the one who ruined their lives. Growing up that way has destroyed my self-esteem and left me terrified of repeating the same patterns if I ever become a parent. Story 19. It was not exactly a terrifying confession, but rather a terrifying experience that came from one. My fiancé and I were staying at a motel while looking for an apartment. There was a bar below our floor, and one of his close friends and that man's fiancé lived in the nearby apartments. We all hung out often. One day while my fiancé was out, his friend came to the door and asked if I wanted to go to the bar with him because he did not want to go alone due to his social anxiety. Before I could answer, he pushed the door open and walked right in, flopping onto the bed. He already seemed intoxicated. I was uncomfortable and, being shy, I reluctantly agreed to go to the bar just to avoid being alone with him. In my hurry, I forgot the room key and the door locked automatically behind us. On the way down, he kept asking for hugs, which made me feel uneasy. Once at the bar, he kept ordering me drinks, even though I repeatedly said no. He put his hand on my leg, asked intrusive questions about my relationship, and started saying inappropriate things. He told me he liked me and asked me not to tell my fiancé, his best friend. Even though there were people around, I felt completely terrified. When he went to the bathroom, I ran to the front office and got a new key, then escaped to the wooded walking trail behind the motel and called my fiancé. He told me to go back to the room, lock the door, and wait for him. As I walked down the long motel hallway, I saw the man coming from the other end. He ran to me, begging me not to tell anyone. When I refused, he punched the wall right beside my head. I managed to get inside the room and lock the door. Moments later, my fiancé arrived, and while I was explaining everything, we suddenly saw the doorknob turning. His friend was trying to force his way in. My fiancé opened the door, and the man was shocked to see him there. My fiancé told him to leave, but he refused, saying he wanted to fight. When the door was shut again, the man rammed it with his head and broke it down. He was enormous, at least 200 pounds heavier than my fiancé, and they began fighting on the floor while I screamed and ran to the bar for help. The motel owner, his son, and a friend rushed up and together managed to restrain the man. It took all 3 of them to hold him down. The police and paramedics arrived to find him bleeding, spitting on them, and shouting delusional things about me being his girlfriend. I am forever grateful that my fiancé came home when he did. Story 20. An acquaintance of mine, who I always thought was dirt poor, once confessed that he had embezzled a huge amount of money from a local company. He claimed it made him a multimillionaire, but he could not spend any of it because he believed the police and tax authorities were watching him. He lived in a rundown apartment in Wichita, drove an old rusty truck, and worked construction. His apartment was practically empty. I would bring over pizza and drinks, and we would sit on the floor playing online games. One of the last times we hung out, he made me swear not to tell anyone where his safe was, then told me where he had hidden the money. He laughed and said people walked over it all the time because he buried it beneath a geocache in a park. But his attitude changed. Suddenly, he was jumpy and paranoid. A few weeks later, he vanished. His apartment was empty, his car gone, his social media accounts deleted, and his phone disconnected. Even his gaming account disappeared. No police ever came asking questions. Out of curiosity and maybe a bit of disbelief, I went to the park to look for the cache. When I arrived, the entire area around where he said it was buried looked like it had been dug up with an excavator. I quickly acted like I was just a random geocacher, said something about not finding the cache, and left fast in case there were hidden cameras. If by any chance you ever read this, Barry B. Gary, I did not find your money, and I have no idea where you went. Story 21. One night, when my mother was completely drunk, she told me in painful detail about the abuse she endured during her childhood. I had always known something terrible had happened to her, but I never understood the full extent until then. She had been assaulted well into her mid-20s, even after she had given birth to my older sister and become pregnant with my brother. She was beaten daily. My father believed my brother was not his after learning about what had happened, and when he confronted my grandfather brutally attacked him, putting him in a coma. My mother's mother knew everything and never tried to stop it. In fact, she even participated in the violence. My mother had 2 older brothers and a sister. One of the brothers was occasionally beaten, but the others were left alone. My mother is not the easiest person to be around, but I now understand why. After being silenced for so long, she no longer filters what she says. She works as a social worker, helping families with disabled children and supporting survivors of SUL violence. She truly is a saint, constantly trying to do good in the world despite her own suffering. I refuse to call those people my grandparents. I despise them. My grandfather eventually went to prison and died there. A disgrace. My grandmother is still alive, and 17 years ago, my mother tried to rebuild a relationship with her and dragged us into it. I tried for my mother's sake, but I could not do it. In my eyes, my grandmother deserves every ounce of pain she caused my mother. To this day, she has never apologized for what she did. Story 22. About 12 years ago, I was traveling through Japan and couch surfing when I stayed in Nara with a woman who offered to host me. She was Indonesian with permanent residency in Japan, not Japanese, and she was strikingly beautiful, charismatic, and intelligent. She owned a small dance studio where she let me sleep on a mat on the floor, which was fine since I was also a dancer at the time. The only odd thing about her was that she seemed to have no real friends. After spending a few enjoyable days sightseeing and talking, we went out one evening for sake. As the drinks flowed, her polished personality began to fade. She told me she had once planned a trip to northern Japan with her best friend, but he had canceled at the last minute, and she was furious about it. She said he had become distant and selfish, and she was angry that he had ruined her plans. Then after a few more drinks, she revealed the real reason he had canceled. He had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy. She said this with bitterness, complaining that his illness had inconvenienced her. Then she smiled and said, "Sometimes I imagine I am the angel of death, and I come down and cover his mouth while he sleeps until he dies." I froze. In that moment, I realized I might be sitting across from a true sociopath, maybe even a psychopath. The words cut even deeper because my best friend from childhood had died from cancer, and hearing her talk that way made me feel sick. But it was late, and all my belongings were still in her studio. I stayed quiet, pretending to be neutral, and waited for morning. I was supposed to take one of her classes the next day, but instead I packed my things at dawn and left without saying goodbye. I wanted nothing more to do with her. Story 23. My uncle is a Vietnam veteran. One night after a few drinks, he confessed that part of the reason he never talks about that chapter of his life is because he remembers almost nothing from it. He said he was actually grateful for that, because forgetting allowed him to move on and live a normal life. Unlike many other veterans he knew who were haunted by memories they could never escape. But he told me that when the Vietnam War Memorial, the black granite wall in Washington, D.C., engraved with the names of the fallen was completed, he went to visit it. He searched for the names of the men in his squad, the ones he had fought beside, shared rations with, and crawled through mud alongside. But when he looked at the rows of names, none of them felt familiar. He couldn't remember a single one. I cannot imagine the weight of that realization, the guilt of surviving when they didn't, and the heartbreak of realizing that even their names were gone from his mind. He told me he was terrified of digging any deeper into those memories, afraid that opening that part of his mind might destroy everything he had built since coming home. It's like a double burden, first surviving the war itself when others didn't, then surviving by forgetting. It showed me that no one truly comes back from war untouched. Even when they seem fine, it never really leaves them. Story 24, I work in a support position within law enforcement, often assisting officers directly. One of those officers and his wife are personal friends of mine. One night, a small group of us, maybe 6 to 10 people, were partying at his house. Out of nowhere, after drinking heavily, he pulled me aside, sat me down, and spent the next 2 hours telling me about years of abuse he had suffered growing up. He said it began when he was a child and continued until his mid-teens. He had buried those memories so deeply that he managed to live a seemingly functional life, though alcohol had always been part of it. Recently, however, his assignment as a crimes investigator had forced him to relive those buried horrors. Dealing with case after case involving children who had gone through what he once did was breaking him down. He told me he felt like his mind was unraveling, and he chose to tell me all of this, me, of all people. I felt trapped between wanting to help and knowing he had shared it in confidence. His marriage was already strained, and I wasn't sure if his wife knew the truth. To make matters worse, I've secretly been in love with her for years, though I've never acted on it. She has even hinted that she was attracted to me once, but I never pursued it because I knew how much damage it could cause. Now I'm caught in an impossible position keeping. His secret may protect his privacy, but could also destroy his marriage. While revealing it might end both his career and his family. It is one of the heaviest moral burdens I've ever carried. Story 25. When I was in high school, my father came home extremely drunk one night. My mother tried to get him to go to bed, but he refused. He started yelling, crying, and accusing her of cheating on him, saying I wasn't his daughter. At one point, my mother threw her wedding ring at him. He tried to leave in his car, but I hid his keys and stood crying in the driveway. My mother called one of his friends to come take him home, but the friend refused, saying he would not bring him over to his place. Eventually, my father fell down the stairs and passed out in the basement. My mother slept in my room with me that night, and we locked the door. When I woke up the next morning, she had already left for work. I got ready for school quietly, hoping not to wake him, but he stirred as I was leaving. He told me that my mother and I had overreacted the night before, insisting he had only had a few drinks. I spent the whole day at school barely holding it together. When I got home that afternoon, he asked me what had happened, as if he didn't remember. I told him everything, and he just hugged me, told me he loved me, said I was his daughter, and left for work. We have never spoken of it again. I believe my mother did cheat, but I also believe I am biologically his child. I've never had it tested, though. It's one of those memories that still sits quietly in the back of my mind, unanswered and unresolved. Story 26. About 6 years into our relationship, right before we got married, my husband got drunk one night and broke down crying. He had been drinking before, and at that time he had a terrible habit of lying, stealing, smoking crack, and generally being self-destructive. Still, I always saw something good in him. That night, he finally told me everything about his childhood, and I understood for the first time that all his addictions and behaviors were rooted in trauma. His stepfather had assaulted him repeatedly when he was a young boy. His mother would often leave for days at a time to accompany that man on long trucking trips, leaving him alone and hungry. He would steal food just to eat and toys because he had none. Sometimes he would not go to school because the man had beaten him so badly. When authorities intervened, he was placed in foster care or boys' homes, but they always sent him back to his mother. That monster of a man died about 10 years ago. My husband's mother is still alive. She once apologized, but he has never forgiven her, and they barely speak. Even now, she treats him poorly. Despite everything, my husband turned his life around. He quit drugs, stopped lying, and rarely drinks. He went to trade school, got a good job, and became the man I always knew he could be. I love him deeply, and it breaks my heart that he had to endure that pain. I later learned that his stepfather also hurt his younger sister. She is now in therapy, healing in her own way, and doing well. Story 27. I had a new college roommate one year who seemed like a completely normal guy. Once we became friends, we decided to get drunk together and share funny stories from high school. I told him about the big party I had thrown, and he said he had done the same. He started describing how he organized it, with kegs, a DJ, and a crowd that made it sound like something out of a movie. Then his tone changed. He said things had gotten out of hand when a group of local drug dealers showed up, armed and violent. They robbed the house, stealing jewelry, furniture, and everything they could carry. His family lost nearly everything. When I asked if things ever got resolved, he stared off into the distance and quietly said, "I'll tell you what I did." He confessed that he had tracked down the leader of that group, found out where he lived, and one night climbed over his fence and killed his dog as revenge. He said that afterward, he considered it good enough and never got caught. Then he just went to bed as if it were nothing. I could not sleep that night. What made it even more unsettling was that he was genuinely one of the kindest people I ever knew. He was loyal, gentle, and always willing to help others. He supported me through a painful breakup and a depressive episode, called his siblings constantly, and sent money home to his family. He even cried once, saying he felt guilty for not being there for his younger brother. Part of me still hopes that he made up the story to sound tough, trying to impress me or mask insecurity, but I will never really know. Last I heard, he had become an engineer, was engaged, and owned 2 dogs. That memory still haunts me sometimes late at night. Story 28. People have always seemed to treat me like a priest in another life, confessing things to me whenever they get drunk. But one particular confession, and everything that came after, is burned into my memory. It started about 20 years ago, when I met a friend's wife for the first time during Thanksgiving. My friend and I had known each other for about a year, and she and I had talked on the phone a few times. We started drinking and talking, and after a few beers, she told me that her husband was cheating on her. It wasn't completely shocking, though hearing it from her directly was unexpected. A few drinks later, she half-joked that she would not care if I slept with her husband. I, of course, declined, which turned out to be a relief later, since they became like family to me. As the night went on, her mother came into the room, and there was tension between them. After her mother left, the wife broke down crying and told me that her mother's brother had begun abusing her when she was 4 years old. When she was 12 or 13, she finally told her mother, who accused her of lying and trying to destroy the family. About 8 years after that Thanksgiving, she cut contact with her mother entirely. At one point during those years, her mother brought up the abuse herself, right in front of her daughter, in a cruel and manipulative way. I told her mother that I already knew and that it was time for her to leave. About 10 years ago, her mother died, and I got a phone call from their daughter, who by then felt like a little sister to me. She was angry that her great-uncle, the abuser, was not invited to the funeral and that her mother wasn't planning to attend. It took a few minutes of listening to her vent before I realized she had no idea about any of it. That shocked me because she had once told me about being assaulted herself as a teenager. Her experience had been handled the opposite way: police involvement, therapy, and reassurance that it wasn't her fault. When I realized she didn't know, I gently told her that she needed to talk to her mother and that I completely supported her mother's decision. But that was all I would say. A few hours later, she called back, sobbing after learning everything. That conversation became a turning point for the family. After that, no one spoke to the mother's sister or the uncle again, and they were the only family members who showed up to the funeral. Story 29. One night, my mother confessed that she had an abortion long before my brother and I were born. She and my father had started dating when they were 16 and began sleeping together soon after, which led to her pregnancy. They were both planning to go to college and knew that having a baby would change everything. My grandmother, who was a nurse, discreetly asked around to find a doctor willing to perform an abortion. It was still illegal at the time, a few years before Roe v. Wade. She eventually found a doctor in Chicago who performed them privately in his apartment. Since my grandmother didn't drive, my 16-year-old father had to drive both her and my mother there. When they arrived, a woman came out to meet them and took my mother upstairs. Neither my father nor my grandmother was allowed inside, so they circled the block in silence until my mother came back out. My mother told me how terrified she had been and how my grandmother was equally afraid that something would go wrong and she would lose her daughter. When she told me this, she asked if I thought less of her, and I told her I didn't at all. They were just kids faced with an impossible situation, doing what they thought was right for their future. I have so much respect for my grandmother for standing by my mother through something so dangerous and difficult. Story 30. My wife and I used to be close friends with a man who was a little odd but never seemed threatening. After he went through a breakup, he was struggling emotionally, so we let him move in with us while he got back on his feet. For a while, things were fine. Then one night, while we were all drinking, he started talking about his ex. We were still friends with the ex, so we usually avoided those conversations. But he was drunk and emotional. He began crying, repeating that he had done something terrible and that he was a horrible person. We tried to calm him down and told him he could tell us anything. That was when he confessed that, while he and his ex were still together, he had killed her cat. He said he thought he was helping because the cat was indoor-outdoor, and they weren't technically allowed to have pets. The cat had gotten pregnant a couple of times, and the ex would always bring her inside to care for her. He said he was afraid they would get caught and lose their home, so he poisoned the cat. When she didn't die right away, he stabbed her to death and later told his ex that she had been hit by a car. We later found out he had done something similar to another cat before. After that night, we began noticing increasingly disturbing behaviors, manipulation, gaslighting, and controlling tendencies. It took us over 6 months to finally get him out of our house, and even now we are only just starting to feel safe in our home again. Story 31. A little over 10 years ago, I hosted a party for my then-girlfriend's close friends from high school. They had all joined the Marines after graduating and had just returned from serving in Afghanistan. A few hours into the party, my girlfriend started panicking because one of them, let's call him Roger, had gone missing. Someone said they saw him stumbling down the road with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. I went outside to look for him and noticed someone sitting in the passenger seat of my old beat-up car, which I never bothered locking. When I got in, I found Roger there, drunk and broken, and that's when he started confessing. He told me about the things he and his unit had to do for their country. He said they were ordered to wipe out entire towns, every living soul, including women and children. He got quiet after that and said there was a day when they were ordered to shoot a baby. He said he joined the Marines to fight the enemy, not to kill innocent people, and that it destroyed him and his friends. One of his buddies had sliced his own face open with a field knife after looking in the mirror, unable to live with himself. Roger cried for a long time while I sat beside him, unsure what to say. We passed his whiskey bottle back and forth and talked until he calmed down. Eventually, we went back to the party like nothing had happened. It's been over a decade since then, and I have no idea if what he said was entirely true, but he didn't seem like the kind of man who would make up something so awful. I've lost touch with all of them, but I still think about that night and hope they somehow found peace. Story 32. A few years ago, I was training a new guy at the restaurant where I worked as a cook. We bonded quickly over our shared love for weed and spent a lot of breaks smoking in his van. He often brought me stuff from his brother since I didn't know many dealers in town. One night after work, he offered to drive me out to his brother's place, about 30 minutes away, to buy some. The only rule, I was not to get out of the van. That should have been my first red flag. We drove deep into the back roads until we reached a rundown house surrounded by motorhomes and junked cars, with several shady-looking people hanging around. He repeated his warning and went inside while I stayed put. I could feel people watching me the whole time. After what felt like forever, he came back and we started heading home. His brother had sent us a gift, a dark vial of what he said was lean. I'd never tried it before, but I drank some anyway. My memory from that point on gets hazy. As we drove, he started telling me about his brother referring to him only by a weird nickname and all the insane criminal things they'd done together. The worst story he shared was about the time his brother's girlfriend broke up with him. He said they broke into her new place, tied her and her new boyfriend to chairs, and tortured them for days. They did all the boyfriend's drugs, sold his stuff for more, raped her, and beat him nearly to death. He described it all in disturbing detail while I sat there, too out of it to react. He said his brother had served some time for it, but he himself had walked free. I barely remember the drive back, just flashes of headlights and his voice spilling more horror. He disappeared not long after that, just vanished. Looking back, I think he needed to confess, to unload the weight of what he knew. But I also think it's better that my memory of that night is as foggy as it is. Story 33, I, a 26-year-old woman, went on a beach holiday with my gay best friend, who was 29, and his childhood friend, who was 27, along with her 2-year-old daughter. His friend had been cheating on her husband with multiple men. Her husband was controlling and verbally abusive, especially after the baby was born. When she heard we were planning the trip, she begged to come along since she had no one to watch the child. What we didn't know was that she had secretly invited her 21-year-old lover. You can imagine our shock when he showed up unannounced at our Airbnb. There wasn't much we could do, even though the situation made me feel disgusted and guilty for indirectly enabling her cheating. Throughout the trip, she and her lover would go out every night and leave the baby with us to babysit. Toward the end of the vacation, one evening after the child was asleep, we all started drinking together. That was when her lover began telling us something that made my skin crawl. He confessed that ever since he was 9 years old and visiting his grandparents' village, he would seek out stray cats just to kill them. As he got older, he said, he developed more creative ways to do it. My best friend and I felt sick, while his friend just laughed like it was a joke. The man described how he would sometimes feed and care for the prettier cats for a few days, gain their trust, and then torture them. He said he did it only at his grandparents' place because there were many stray animals and no one would notice. Then he went on to say that when he got older, around 16 or 17, he started targeting larger animals like stray dogs, doing the same horrific things. He went into disturbing detail about how he would harm them. The worst part was that this man was sleeping in the same room as the woman and her 2-year-old daughter. At one point he said, "There's something so beautiful about being in control of something so tiny and fragile, and I couldn't stop thinking about that poor child in the next room." I never saw any of them again after that trip. I didn't tell her husband because he was a violent man involved with a gang, and I wasn't willing to risk my safety. Story 34. Back in college, I had a roommate who was over 21. One night, he invited me to a party for his friend who had just gotten out of jail. That should have been the first red flag, but I was 20 at the time, and free alcohol was too tempting to pass up. At first, it was a normal party drinking, small talk, music. Then a group of guys formed a circle, and one of them began telling a story. He said it happened when he was in high school, involving his younger sister. According to him, his sister came home one night claiming her boyfriend had assaulted her at a party. Enraged, he and a few friends decided to get revenge. They found the boyfriend at that same party, kidnapped him, and took him into the woods. He said they beat the boy relentlessly, then tied him to a tree. To make things worse, he described how they used a pickup truck to pin the boy against the tree, letting it idle forward until he couldn't breathe and eventually died. The way he told it was so casual, like he was retelling a prank instead of a murder. I was terrified. The others around him were laughing like it was some kind of dark joke. Then he delivered what he called the punchline, that his sister later admitted she had lied about the assault because she wanted to break up with her boyfriend without looking bad. He laughed, and some of his friends joined in. I forced myself to laugh too, because I was scared of what might happen if I didn't. That night changed everything for me. I realized I was hanging out with dangerous people. Soon after, I transferred to another college across the country just to get away and start over. Story 35. My best friend from childhood, who I'm still fairly close with, moved to the city in his early 20s to pursue a career in musical theater. A mutual female friend and I decided to visit him and have a night out together. We were all young and reckless, not yet experienced enough to pace ourselves when drinking. He started downing strong beers much faster than we could keep up. Before long, he was completely drunk, slurring his words and barely keeping himself upright. He began talking about how he had been sleeping around and then suddenly confessed that he had performed a sewer act on another man, saying it like he had somehow lost his sense of who he was. Later, another woman, one of his co-workers, I think, joined our table to say hello, and as soon as she left, he confessed that he had slept with her too, even though she was married to a pastor. At that point, he was crying and shouting, drowning in shame and guilt. It felt like he was punishing himself, trying to rebel against the person he thought he was supposed to be. We helped him home that night. He could barely walk without our support, and just when we thought we'd made it safely, he groped our female friend. It was an awful, heartbreaking end to what was supposed to be a fun night catching up with someone we loved. He never mentioned that night again, and neither did we. Looking back, I think he felt abandoned by us, and that night was the explosion of all that loneliness and confusion. It still makes me sad that we didn't see the signs or reach out sooner. Story 36. When I was 17, my mom worked as a bartender at a small, half-dive bar to earn some extra money. The owner was this friendly, older Italian man who sat in the same spot every night, drinking Wild Turkey straight while chatting with customers. He was the kind of guy who'd insist on buying me pizza from the place next door whenever I stopped by to visit my mom. One night, a little after midnight, she called me and asked if I could come pick him up and drive him home because he'd had too much to drink. When I arrived, he looked broken, red-eyed, quiet, trying to open another bottle of whiskey with trembling hands. After some coaxing, we got him into my car. My mom gave me his address, about 20 minutes away, and off we went. For most of the drive, neither of us spoke. Then at a red light, I looked over and saw tears streaming down his face. I gently asked what was wrong, and that's when he began to talk. For the next 3 hours, sitting parked in my car outside his home, he confessed to committing several murders decades earlier. He didn't give names, but he explained the how, the why, and the where. Most of them, he said, were connected to small-time mafia disputes, but one was personal revenge. He cried through much of it, alternating between guilt and numbness. When he finally finished, he looked at me, smiled weakly, apologized, and pulled me into a hug. He thanked me for listening, got out of the car, and disappeared inside his house. I never told my mother what he said. She quit that bar years ago, and now, 15 years later, at 32, I still think about that night and the haunted look in his eyes. Story 37. When I was about 15 or 16, my dad, who lived a wild and troubled life, got extremely drunk one night and sank into one of his dark, depressed moods. He sat in his usual chair, the one he occupied every evening after work, with his music blasting in the background. I walked by him on my way to the kitchen when he stopped me, saying he needed to tell someone something before it destroyed him. He said he feared going to hell for it. I sat down, unsure what was coming, and he began to tell me a story from his past. Through tears and bursts of anger, he confessed that when he was younger, he had shot and killed a man in Compton over drugs or drug money. He gave me a detailed, emotional account of what happened, sometimes sobbing, sometimes seething with fury. He made me promise never to tell anyone, not even my mom, and swore me to silence for life. That night haunted me. My dad could be a fun drunk sometimes, but that night he was different, serious, broken, almost haunted himself. He carried so much pain, and even though he was far from perfect, he was one of my best friends. I miss him every single day.